If you have found this video, I assume you're curious about the Final Fantasy XVI Artbook that was just released in Japan and will be released next year in Europe. I got it on the release day from the Japanese Square Enix web store, and as a pre-ordered extra, it came with this bookmark of Yosho. Let's have a look while I talk a bit about the game. Before I begin, I want to add that there might be spoilers, no big ones, but if you're completely new to Final Fantasy XVI and don't want to know anything, then I would mute this in case you still want to see the book. So, I just finished it and I have some mixed feelings. I have both negatives and positives with this game, and I will start with the negatives. So, my number one is the visuals. I know most people don't agree with me, but I can't help it. I feel like Square is going so into the realism that they've lost the fantasy in Final Fantasy. To be honest, I think the character design is straight up boring. I miss the fun aesthetics we could see in older games. That also applies to the cities. I usually always get a favorite city, and in this game I actually did not. So yeah, more fantasy next time. Number 2, the beginning. When I received the game, I was so excited to see what kind of opening sequence it would have. The older games were always so exciting to start because the opening really captured me. And this was just, I don't know what to say. That's really literally how I felt. Like, okay, I don't feel anything for anyone, and yeah, it was pretty lukewarm. I was so disappointed until the Phoenix Gate incident, then I was hooked. Number 3, the soundtrack. I found the music to be very generic, nothing special. Some songs I even found boring, but I miss not having at least one song that I really liked. The best track was probably the boss battle one, but I don't think I'll even put that one on my playlist, to be honest. Number 4, the level up system. I was honestly surprised when I reached level 50 and I realized I didn't get any more experience points. At level 50, my Clive didn't have more than 3000 HP. Number 5, the story progress. Quite early, I figured the story progress out. With that, I mean how the missions are gonna play out. If I can be more specific and maybe add a small spoiler, once I saw the Icon ability chart, I realized that all of the Icons would be added, and once I got Garuda, I understood that I would gain the others the exact same way, unfortunately. It kind of makes the story predictable, which is a bit boring. Number 6, the battles, especially the Icon battles. I'm not a fan of the action RPG genre. I actually preferred when Final Fantasy was turn-based. I generally like when you have to have some sort of tactic in battle. So one thing that really bugged me in 16 was, for example, how you could do damage to, let's say, a fire enemy with fire magic. I also feel like the battles were very easy, so to balance it out, they just added a silly amount of HP to the enemies. Some bosses I thought were dead boring because they didn't require any tactic and I just had to smash for a very long time. And the Icon battles, even though I have to admit they look aesthetically pretty great, that's the only purpose they had. They weren't difficult and some were basically automatic. Sometimes they were just messy and I couldn't even see where Ifrit was or where the enemy was. Number 7, the translation. One thing I really appreciate about this newer generation of games is that you can choose to have the Japanese voices. Since I live in Japan, I speak and understand Japanese, but it's not perfect, and that's why I chose to play the game with Japanese voices and English subtitle. I can understand the regular conversations between the characters, but when the conversation starts to get political, I have a hard time to follow. What I noticed was how different the tone and in some cases the whole conversations were. The English was much more rough and I felt like most characters were almost rude, whereas the Japanese was very polite. I'm curious as to why Square decided to make the translation like this. Number 8, too many boring side quests. I enjoy a good side quest, but not when there are so many they start to get silly. I don't think it's a spoiler, but quests such as Clive getting reunited with his chocobo was a good one, because it relates to the main story. But come on, the blacksmith is sad because he doesn't know the recipe to some armor? I don't think so. Which leads me to my final point. Number 9. Too many boring, unimportant characters. All the side quests introduces so many boring, unimportant characters. Some are completely unnecessary, and some are given way too much space that they don't need or deserve. Also, I might be the only one, because I feel like you're supposed to like him, but I can't stand Gav. Okay, let's go for the positives now. My number 1 has to be the love story. I'm a sucker for a good love story, and in Final Fantasy history, there has been some good ones and some pretty bad ones. This one is really good. As the player, we get to see Clive and Jill's relationship will develop, and I can understand why they love each other, compared to Squall and Rinoa. It might also be because the characters are older, and I feel like Square's approach to the whole game was to attract an older audience, so the characters' relationships also felt more mature. Number 2, the main characters. I think one of the things that saved this game was the main characters and their joint relationships. For example, I really love the Brotherhood theme. So it isn't just a love story between Jill and Clive, but it's also actually the love story between the brothers, Clive and Joshua. I thought that was very sweet. We've seen siblings relationships in Final Fantasy before, but I think this one might be my favorite one. Number 3, the Acon abilities. I personally love leveling up, and that's why I was so disappointed at how weak Clive was at the end. Despite me leveling up to the maximum, and I love collecting experience points and ability points, so the Acon Sphere Grid, if I may call it that, was one of the things I really enjoyed completing and testing out the new abilities as I gained them. And then to my last point, number 4, the ending. I'm not gonna give any big spoilers, but I really like the ending. I know some people might not agree, but I think it was an open ending, hinting at a certain direction, and I love that. That way, we as the players can imagine what happened, and I can in a way customize the ending to my liking. This is going to be one of those endings that at least I will think about for days, maybe even weeks. So, final thoughts. Even though my negatives are way more than the positives, at least for me, the positives were a lot stronger than the negatives, and that's why I don't hate the game, even though it might seem that way. Actually, it's the quite opposite. I tried to think about where I would place Final Fantasy XVI in my overall Final Fantasy ranking, and I'm not sure, but it most certainly is going to the upper half, no questions asked. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. Check out the Artbook once it's been released worldwide, and drop a comment with your positives and negatives about Final Fantasy XVI.